All right, here we are on day 15 of the challenge. And today we continue to reflect on this idea of suffering and consenting to the reality of suffering. Um, the section is titled, "The Most Painful Suffering is the Suffering That We Reject." So we have this misunderstanding of suffering essentially in our life. We have this fear of suffering. We're trained to think that suffering is bad. And at the same time, we as Catholics, we will soon be entering into a time of Lent where, in many regards, we celebrate suffering, right? Or at least the ways that God uses and transforms our suffering into something beautiful, right? We look at suffering in a totally different way. As Catholics, we look at a crucifix as our focal point in all of our churches. St. John Vianney has this, he mentions this quote, "Peaceful suffering is no longer suffering." And so Jacques Philippe in this text essentially talks about suffering in the sense of it's going to happen, right? We learned that in yesterday's reflection. It's going to happen. It's a part of this mystery. It's a part of the life of Jesus, which we're called to enter into. And essentially, we have to accept it, consent to it, receive it, and not want to eliminate it out of our life. Otherwise, we eliminate that component of our life with Jesus, which is perhaps the most intimate, powerful, beautiful realities of the life of Jesus. But he gives us analogies of our body when you suffer a blow, and you're tense, it actually does more damage. So there has to be this ability to be comfortable amidst suffering. And it becomes an acclimated taste, right, in our spiritual life. This is why the church teaches fasting. Because if you refuse to acquire the taste for something, and then you are forced into the situation, you're going to want to spit it out. So this is why we have to practice acquiring the taste for suffering. He says, wanting to eliminate suffering at all costs can sometimes produce even further sufferings that are even harder to bear. And I'm sure you know of people in your life who are experiencing suffering. And because they want nothing to do with it, because they haven't acquired the taste, they try to spit it out every day. But suffering's inevitable for us. And when we choose to go the other route, instead of growing and maturing and acquiring that taste, we grow in resentment. Suffering becomes worse and worse and worse. And of course, we're not only talking about the physical dimensions, but this is spiritually. The interior suffering that we face becomes more and more intense. And he says, one further point, what really hurts is not so much suffering itself as the fear of suffering. Are we afraid to suffer for the Lord? Are you afraid to suffer for the Lord? Am I afraid to suffer for the Lord? And if so, why? What's being taken away from us when we're suffering? And the real vision that we need is the identity of Christ in us is being taken from us. Right? And just to be clear, he does mention right off the bat, there are sufferings that we can remedy, right? And we should try to be more available, and as a witness in this world, we can take ibuprofen for a headache, right? We can even pray for healing in our life in different capacities so that we have a greater freedom to serve in different ways. But some suffering is inevitable. And we need to be prepared for that. We need to make that part of our life daily in order to more fully enter into the life of Jesus. And then once we do, suffering no longer is suffering. Right? It's a joyous relationship with our Savior who has suffered and died for us and with us. So today, consider the ways that we can suffer and acquire the taste for suffering in our life, or perhaps the ways that we've been invited to suffer, but need to get more comfortable and settled in and along for the ride that Jesus wants us to bear the cross with him.